Hi everyone, my name is Katy, Gero, and I'm going to present our work on the social dynamics of AI support in creative writing. This is work that I did with my collaborator, Tao Long, as well as my advisor, Lydia Chilton, while I was a PhD student at Columbia University. The main research question of this paper is when and why might a creative writer turn to a computer versus a peer or mentor for support? And our interest in this question came from a lot of prior work, including our own work, where we were looking at co-creative writing systems. And something we expected from these systems is that if we looked at the quality of the suggestions that were being provided, and this is a graph from a past paper, which you're welcome to go look at, and we compared the quality to the usefulness that participants reported the system having, we thought that this would be a nice, at least decently correlated line that as the system outputs got better, people found the system more useful. But here we're plotting participants from a study we did where people were writing tutorials. And what we found is that there wasn't a big correlation between the quality of what the system was giving the people and the usefulness that they reported. And so we kind of wanted to get back to basics and ask this question about when and why are creative writers turning to support in the first place, to kind of help understand this question of why we're getting such a variety of responses to different co-creative writing systems. So to do this, we interviewed 20 creative writers, including 6 currently using an AI support tool called PseudoWrite. And we wanted to get a big variation of writing genres as well as experiences. So we had people who had MFAs who were far along in their career, as well as novices. And we had science journalists, as well as novelists and poets and people writing analytical essays. Then we did a qualitative analysis of the interview transcripts, and this resulted in annotated quotes, as well as a 2-level taxonomy. So this was the taxonomy we came up with. It had 3 main pillars. The first was writers' desires for the artifact that they were creating. This is whatever their writing project was at the time. The second was their perception of different support actors, where support actors could be computers or people. We talked about both. And the third are the values they had about getting support in the first place. Now, I think it's useful to think of these dynamics in terms of internal versus external dynamics of support. If you were to sit down and watch a writer ask for help for something, what you would probably see is that the writer is creating their artifact. Then at some point they request help from an actor, which might be a person or a computer or whatever. And then that actor supports the creative process. This is maybe what we could see just by watching people. But in our interviews, what we really came up a lot more were these internal dynamics of support. So a writer isn't just creating an artifact, isn't just working on their project. They have desires for what they're trying to achieve and things that they're struggling with. And they aren't just requesting help from a support actor. They have perceptions about who or what is available to them and how well those things might help them with their task. Finally, writers have values that dictate what kind of support they're interested in getting at different parts of the writing process. And this is what this taxonomy and these themes are really getting at, these internal dynamics of support. Each of these is super interesting, and I'd love to talk about all of them. I'm just going to talk about 2 of them in this talk, but I encourage you to read the paper to learn more about the others. First, I want to talk about how writers had a perception of the individuality of support actors that were available to them. On one hand, this meant thinking about the levels and kinds of expertise that an actor might bring. This is a writer who writes analytical essays, asking, well, they would wonder if it was a high school student or a PhD student, what their level of expertise is with the topic at hand, as well as things like, is this person a skeptic or an optimist? But people didn't just think about expertise, they also thought about personal experience. This is a fiction writer saying, if I want to know how something reads to another Indian person, I will show my brother. But if I'm writing a story about girlhood, I might send it to a female friend who's also writing about girlhood. And so you can see that people are developing subtle understandings of what different kinds of support they can get from different kinds of people. Finally, something that came up a lot was this idea of the impossibility of a universal reader. This is a quote from a writer saying that the universal perspective has typically been the perspective of cis straight white men, and other perspectives just aren't considered universal. But all the writers in our study understood that there was no one perfect reader, that everyone, as well as everything, every computer, was bringing some kind of perspective when they're giving you support. So writers are developing a pretty rich mental model of actors' individuality, and this modulates not just who they turn to for support, but what they do with the support that they receive. Now, writers also brought up that authenticity was very important to them, and this was a concern they had when getting any kind of support. And they were able to dig into some deeper ideas of authenticity than I think we've seen in prior work. So for instance, they weren't just concerned about their own sense of authenticity, but the reader's sense of authenticity. How authentic are they projecting to the reader? Will the reader sense that they had help in a way that might not be appropriate? They also talked about just the impact of viewing suggestions. This is a quote of someone saying, "Once something is on the page, it's a little bit harder to imagine anything else. For this reason, writers sometimes avoided asking for help in certain stages of a writing project when they were worried that that help might shift the direction of the project in a way they weren't ready for." But writers also had differing opinions on where authenticity lies in the writing process. Some talked about crafting the ending of a story or an essay as the most important thing to them, whereas others thought the high-level storyline was where their humanity lied. And still others thought that the act of drafting, sitting down and writing every day, was what made them feel most like a writer. So writers very much didn't agree where the source of authenticity was in the writing process. Finally, there were important differences between how a human might impact their feeling of authenticity versus a computer. This is a participant saying that when her brother influences her, she feels like there's more of her in that influence because of this extensive relationship and writing relationship that she has with her brother. Whereas others talked about computers as feeling much more private than asking a person for help. Some people talked about computers as being more like talking to yourself. In this way, writers' comfort with different kinds of influence was very much modulated by where their sense of authenticity lies. To get back to this question that motivated this whole study, what makes some participants find a system useful and others not? I think these internal dynamics of support allow us to start asking that question. For instance, if a writer really values idea generation, then they might not want help with that, and any help that they receive will feel inauthentic, for instance. But a writer that values execution over idea generation is going to have a very different response to a co-creative writing system. I think there's a lot of really interesting future work, especially as we're seeing co-creative writing becoming a bigger part of the world. I think there's a lot of potential for an algorithmic folk theory for language models. Writers have these rich perceptions of what people can give them. What do writers really think that language models can give them? How are they developing these mental models? I also think it would be great to start correlating writers' attitudes towards all these things, their perceptions, their values, with the actual actions they're taking in their writing process. And finally, a big theme that came up that I didn't get to touch on so much, but I think is a really important area for future work, is how writers might be able to share their intention with computers. It can be very difficult, especially with complex writing tasks, to be able to communicate your intention. And so far, computers haven't really been able to pick up on it. I'm really excited about this work that we did and the future work that can come out of it. I would love to talk to you about it, so please don't hesitate to reach out. And I thank you for listening to this talk.